Oh yeah, thank you for the people who are introducing themselves. It's always nice to see where you all come from, what your background is, because tile is very interdisciplinary, so it's very exciting to see. Okay, I'm going to start the meeting. Welcome everybody to today's tile seminar. It is the final one in 2025. And today we have Rebekah Marangon with us. She is a senior lecturer in law and program director for the LLB at Aston University. Her work focuses on inclusive assessment design, curriculum development, and the use of digital tools to enhance learning and teaching. She leads the project using low-code automation, so Microsoft Forms and Power Automate, to streamline marking and feedback, improve moderation, and generate data to inform program-level decision-making. Rebekah is a senior fellow of the HERE and an advocate for pedagogically grounded, student-centered innovation in legal education. Today, her talk will be on beyond efficiency, automating marking to improve feedback, moderation, and program design. All right. Welcome, Rebekah. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you
can
so
share
much.
your screen.
Fantastic. We have tested this, so hopefully it just works and comes on and shares as it's meant to. I'm going to add in a momentary caveat, which is that I have the beginnings of a migraine. So if I yawn, that's just what happens when my brain gets a migraine. Very sorry about that. But we're going to power through and it's all going to be fine. Thank you so much for letting me come and speak to you all today about a project that is very close to my heart and is something that I have been working on for around the last 4 years, on and off, on top of the various the teaching responsibilities that I have at Aston University. So the focus is very much on a tool that can be used and adopted within marking across discipline in order to make the marking process more efficient and to make the feedback generation process work not only for the student, but also for us as educators. The presentation's broadly going to focus on 3 themes. So I'm going to start off very quickly talking about the problem. I'm not going to talk about this in too much detail, if only for I'm currently in marking season already, and I fear that whenever we talk about the challenges and the joys of marking, that it does unearth a slight form of PTSD. So I'm going to brush through some of the challenges that we all experience when it comes to marking before talking about what the approach is, explaining how the approach works, and then finishing off by having a conversation about what the uses of the approach are. So what are the benefits of using it? How can you use it within your own practice? And then at the end, there is an opportunity for you to, if you wish, to have access to a toolkit that will allow you to set the approach up for yourself. So the problem. We all know the importance of assessment when it comes to students learning. We all know that assessment acts as a key motivator towards learning and as a metric for assessing learning. So we can go to the work of Gibbs that says that assessment systems dominate what students are oriented towards in their learning, that feedback is part of any effective assessment plan. So we all know that feedback is super important, that it allows our students to be able to improve, to engage fully with the process. If they don't see getting value out of it, then they won't engage as much as they could. And we can know that poor feedback can have really detrimental impacts on student trust. We've all, I'm sure, had complaints about feedback and the mark not reflecting oftentimes the effort that students feel like they put in. So when we have conversations about feedback, it tends to be, or assessment, it tends to be, but I put in so much work. Why did I not get the mark that I feel like I deserve? And what's often thrown at us when we talk about what makes for efficient feedback, because if we know that feedback has to be of a good quality to have that effective assessment plan impact, to have that motivational impact, the thing that's often thrown back at us is speed. That in order for feedback to be effective, it has to be speedy feedback. So the speed of feedback is critically important and maybe the single most important factor in determining its success. Now, from the various institutions that you're all part of, I don't know how long you get, but at Aston, we get 20 working days in order to get our feedback done, which once you've included moderation and the programme office requiring the marks, works out to being actually closer to 14 working days in order to get our feedback back to our students. And therein lies a lot of the trauma. So I thought the best way to deal with this is via the work of memes that I found on the internet. So we have the joys of the pure quantity of paperwork that we have to do, the quantity of marking that is expected of us within that short time frame. So I like the moving out, nope, just a teacher taking home some papers to grade. Or here's your pile of marking, 20 minutes per essay should be enough to analyse it, critique and judge it. Oh, and don't forget to write formative feedback. Or our teacher when she's done. And as someone that I'm currently 85% done on marking 300, 500 words essays on AI and legal research that I can sense have been heavily influenced by artificial intelligence, that is very much how I feel. The skeleton broken on the bench. Thanks, Steph. I agree. In terms of other elements that we have for them, or other problems that we have with marking, the fact that marking is quite a mentally heavy process. It takes a hell of a lot of mental load. The fact that you're reading and you're marking and seeing students do things that you weren't necessarily expecting, or they may have completely ignored the guidance that you've given them in class. It's not something that most academics say is their favorite part of their job. It's often something that can be quite soul destroying at times as you're trying to provide quality feedback in such a short time frame whilst also reading the same answer over and over and over again. And I can guarantee now from personal experience that my face 98% of the time whilst grading papers, that is very much the face that's been pulled throughout my most recent marking period and pretty much every marking period in my career so far. And then last but not least, we have that painful experience that you can put in all the effort in the world, that it can be the best feedback you've ever written. And there is that strong probability that we see both throughout the literature and from anecdotal experience of students not engaging with the feedback. Some students not even reading the feedback, the mark being the only thing that attaches in that immediate interest, and then students not really doing anything with the feedback that we actually provide. So all in all, it can be quite a rough experience. So a few years ago, when I was a little bit earlier on in my career, I decided that I wanted to have a go at fixing it because I thought there must be a better way to do this. My approach to marking at the time was often I'd have a Word document with lots of set phrases in it, lots of pieces of feedback that I was repeatedly giving to students. There was that constant risk and fear that I would accidentally close that document, but also the time wasted spent going through my document because I was certain I wrote a feedback comment about this matter, but I can't find it now. So maybe I hadn't copied it. So I go back through different scripts. It was such an intensive, labor-heavy experience that I wanted to see if there was an alternative way of writing the feedback, which made the process more efficient and quicker, which made the most of the feedback generated, and that does require a slight reframing of how we view feedback, or more specifically, who we view the stakeholder of feedback to be. but whilst also maintaining the standards and reliability. Because one of the things that I felt quite a lot, especially in the early stages of my career, but even to this day, was imposter syndrome around marking. That fear that I was completely off base when it came to marks. Even now, as I say, 86% through my marking, and I'm starting to question what a first class mark actually looks like. Am I completely out of line? That imposter syndrome really hits me as an academic. But also, I'm now marking across large marking teams. So ensuring that consistency is really important. So I wanted to create an approach that does all of those things, which is where this new approach comes in. The first thing to say before I go into it is that this approach will not automatically make your feedback better. If what you are writing as feedback is a bit rubbish, it will continue to be a bit rubbish under this approach. What this approach does is it changes how the feedback is actually generated and compiled. And that provides you with greater time, which means that you can then work on the quality of the statements that you are providing. Now, the easiest way to demonstrate this or to explain this process is often through an actual example. So there's a QR code on the screen, which if you complete will provide you with an example of what this approach actually looks like. The approach uses Microsoft Forms, Power Automate, and then it can either link towards OneNote or it can link to email. So if you've had any experience with Microsoft Forms, it's basically just a surveying tool where you can have open text comments or you can have multiple choice comments. I tend to use a mixture within this approach. In particular, though, relying on the multiple choice style questions. In essence, what we do is we start off by creating our form and pre-writing feedback comments for the form. So common areas of feedback that you are expecting to see within your students' pieces of work. You might want to link it specifically to the wording of the rubric, but they are just a series of statements that you would be providing as feedback for the students. Now, the way that it works is that once you have your form, you complete it, you can constantly edit it and update it. You can have open text comments to write more personalized feedback, to expand on the points. You can click as many boxes as you feel like. And once we hit the point where we click submit, automatically Power Automate works in the background to pull the data out of the Microsoft form and to place it into a template that you have created. So in this example, it's using Microsoft OneNote. There is a template, and you can see that template now has comments from the form in it. So it's pulled that data across. All that you then have to do is you can then, once you have your Microsoft form set up, so your populated template, you can copy and paste it and go into Turnitin and paste it in, which will be your feedback for your student. Alternatively, if you don't want to use OneNote, so OneNote, the benefit is that obviously it would keep all of your feedback in one notebook folder that you can then share, for example, with an external. But you can also, as an alternative, use your email. So I can see that people, because people have out of offices on, people have started to get the emails through, which should have taken the Microsoft form that you completed and populated a template with it. You can have it sent to your email and then copy and paste from email straight into Turnitin or Blackboard assignments. And that's the basics of how the approach works. In terms of how long it takes to create the approach, it actually doesn't take that long once you know how to do it. I provide training on setting up the approach, and it normally takes me about an hour with a member of staff to set up a basic flow, which is what we call it in Power Automate, alongside a Microsoft Forms that works. And once you have one, you can just save it as and keep amending and keep adding to it. And as I say at the end, I'm happy to share a toolkit with step-by-step guides and examples that you can use in order to make use of the approach yourself. Now, in terms of the uses and the benefits of those uses, the first benefit is marking efficiency. So from the literature, we know that one of the biggest complaints that we get from students is that feedback doesn't provide enough information to be helpful. It's too general and vague to be of any formative use. We have that the assessment process is a deeply emotional one, with students investing themselves and their time in their assessment tasks. And rightly or wrongly, we're starting to see within the literature the traditional view of you don't want your feedback to be too long because students won't read it, being increasingly challenged as students are viewing it as a measure of care. So the amount of feedback, I put in so much effort into my piece of work, the amount of feedback I get, I want that to reflect the level of work that I put in. So shorter feedback is more likely to be criticised as being of poor quality, even if actually it's of a higher standard than longer feedback. As it says here, short feedback suggests that lecturers have not spent time on the feedback, with students viewing tick boxes in particular as an insult. Now, I'm not saying that we should make our feedback longer for the sake of it, but one of the benefits of this approach is that it makes the process of generating feedback quicker. You can provide more feedback because of that, because the more detailed your form, the more data points you have to pull through. But also the time saved in generating that general feedback means that you can in turn provide more feedback, for example, in in-text comments. So it makes the process more efficient, and what you choose to use that time for is up to you. Be that to make the feedback longer, or be that to just speed it up. So, for example, we timed the marking within one of the modules. We timed the amount of time it was taking for us to mark freehand versus the amount of time it took with a Microsoft form, and it works out as being about 50% of the time. It is quicker to use the form because there's less mental load associated with formulating those comments, with trying to think of another nice way to say not quite, because it's already been there and done for you. It also has received really positive feedback. So one of the common areas of concern that I hear from academics when I share this approach is, don't students complain that it's copy and pasted feedback? It's not really personalized feedback anymore. My first counter to that is I think we need to look at what we mean by personalized feedback. That in the commodification of education and the large cohort sizes that we have, with anonymous marking as well, how personalized is any of the feedback that we give? I think instead a better word is bespoke. So it's not personalized feedback, it's bespoke feedback. It's feedback that is associated with the piece of work that's been provided. And actually, the more varied statements that you have that recognize the different elements or different ways in which a student might have adapted a task means that you can provide more detailed and therefore more bespoke feedback than if you're writing quickly, trying to write some sentences off the top of your head associated with a piece of work. So this was feedback from a module that was set up I gave them the tools to set it up, and they set it up independently of me, with the module leader saying that it made the marking way more efficient and increased the amount of detail I provided to the students, but also the student responding really positively. This was an unsolicited comment. We didn't ask for feedback. They just sent it, final year students sent it of their own accord, to basically say that it was some of the best feedback that they had received. It had so much depth in it. And talking to the module leader, that was only possible because of the time saving that there was. This was a 3,000 word essay, and the module leader had about, I think it was about 280 that year to mark with one other member of staff within that 15 days. So it was only doable because of the time efficiency savings that were made by this form. Now, I recognise that a few moments ago I said this approach won't make your feedback better. Well, now I'm about to tell you why it does. So, you know, swings and roundabouts. The reason that this has the potential to make it better, so I'm not saying it will 100% make it better, but it has the potential, is because it requires you, or it encourages you, because you can develop it as you mark, but it encourages you to think about what the comments are going to be, to formulate those comments in advance of you actually sitting down and doing the marking, which means that you're coming at that feedback writing process when you're slightly fresher and less dazed by the joy that is marking. So we know that negative comments, given the emotional nature of assessments, can have a detrimental impact on student confidence and student experience. So it's important that we make use of positive comments that are helpful and not judgmental. You're far more likely to be able to successfully do that, or to ask artificial intelligence to help you to successfully do that before or in the early stages of the marking process, as opposed to when you're on day 15 and the light is at the end of the tunnel, yet seems so far away. So from a mental load perspective, it has that potential of allowing that better feedback. And anecdotally from colleagues that have used this approach, what we've also found is them saying that when a form's been designed by somebody else, oh, I would never have written it that way, but that is so much more positive. So it allows for you to make the best of your team as well. Some of the, one of the other ways, so I was interested to see that there is a dissertation student looking at formative learning. So one of the ways that I think that this approach can work really effectively is in the use of understanding of assessment. So again, a bit of literature. We know that for feedback to be effective, it has to relate to the assessment criteria. And we know that students should be able to see the clear link between assessment criteria and the feedback that they receive. It's growing increasingly common for universities to acquire the use of marking rubrics. And whilst marking rubrics are great, they're also can be massively flawed. I'm sure we've all had experiences when trying to use a rubric when you're like, oh, the student falls in between, or I want the first sentence of that comment in the 40s and I want the second sentence in the 50s, but I don't want to click the 40 box and make them think they've done all of that wrong. They're can be quite rudimental in their approach, and their effectiveness, I think, is diminished because of that. Now, one of the ways that we can help students to understand the assessment criteria more and the assessment rubric and marking criteria in more detail is, for example, through the use of exemplars. I'm sure lots of us in our teaching have used exemplars, asked the students to have a read, asked the students to provide feedback to what mark would you have given this piece of work. You often tend to have students being exceptionally harsh at one end of the scale, or sometimes being very generous, and then you tell them what the mark should be and they're like, okay, cool. But how much that actually helps them, I'm not sure, because we tell them, oh no, you're wrong, this actually would be a 40, but they don't really necessarily understand why it would be a 40 versus why it would be a 70. So as it says, often feedback comments employ the academic language used to express academic criteria, but only 33% of the respondents in Higgins' survey in 2001 claimed that they actually understood the criteria, even when exemplar activities had been used. So we could use this approach, though, in order to improve that exemplar experience, be that to improve it just in general or to improve it from a peer marking perspective. So there is another QR code, which I'm hoping is going to work because it was set up for within Aston's university permissions, and obviously being external, I should have tweaked it to work, but if it doesn't, apologies. But this is an example of an activity that we did in class where we had provided the students with an exemplar. They used the QR code to complete the Microsoft form to tick on the feedback comments that they would give that student. When they pressed submit, they received the email, just in exactly the same way that I would if I was marking it. They received the email with the feedback, but if any of you have a go, you'll see that at the top of the email, it's their feedback, and underneath it is the feedback that we provided on a macro level. So the student can see and is asked to reflect on, well, did I give the same feedback points? So if you said it was, or if the student has identified analysis as being a 40, but we actually gave it a 60, that's a point of difference where they don't necessarily understand that criteria. And as is about to be explained in a moment, when it comes to the data that you get from this approach, the benefit there is that I could then see the data, identify any gaps in understanding of the assessment criteria, and provide further clarification on what we were looking for within those criteria specifically. So in this case, the students were blown away by the amount of research that was included, when actually the amount of research was not fantastic. I could see that from a cohort perspective, and therefore bring in interventions in order to make sure the students understood what we were looking for when it came to good versus very good use of sources. Another benefit is benchmarking and moderation. So we know that consistency is the goal when it comes to benchmarking. So benchmarking being that early marking process, if you're team marking, where you're talking amongst your team to work out what constitutes a first versus what's the past standard. And moderation being the word that I'm using for the once you've all finished marking, making sure that everyone marked to that same standard, plus internal and external moderation. Now, as was said by Coffin, there is a need for a discussion between lecturers on related courses to ensure that feedback practices, including words and phrases used to characterise student writing, are consistent, or where not, that any differences can be explained to students. So that copy and paste feedback and concern that academics have when I talk about this approach, there is research that suggests that actually having greater consistency is often preferred for the student. It's really important that they can understand those words because that will help them with their assessment literacy going forwards. The benefits of the approach, the first of which is that the feedback is always going to be in the exact same template and the exact same structure and format, which means that whether I'm marking it or my colleague is marking it, all the students are going to get feedback of a similar length, of a similar quality, and of a similar structure. This then means that we can pull data and have proper comparison, data-informed comparison of things like benchmarking and moderation. So the picture is of an Excel spreadsheet where I color-coded using conditional formatting within Excel the statements to be green colour if they were a positive statement and red if they were the student had done something wrong or had missed something out. And then put them in order of strongest to weakest, highest mark to lowest mark. And that gave me a clear snapshot of my cohort that I could see from a picture whether or not the marking looked broadly in line with each other. So, for example, it might be that I have a look at some of those again if one of them stands out. So it might, if there's one that's all red across the board, but I gave it a 70, that might indicate that, I don't know, I just marked lots that were terrible. And this one had a momentary bit of genius. So I've gone, great, first, so much better. But in the grand scheme of all of the marking, it stands out. And that might mean I go back and have a look. Or I consider the feedback I've given and whether the feedback matches onto the mark that I've given that particular student. You can also use the approach to generate a mark. So one thing that you can do the more that you embed Excel, and this isn't a requirement, but if you want to, as you embed Excel into the process, you can code different statements in your form so that they suggest a particular mark, and then do the maths in accordance with your criteria or your rubric, or just add things up if you're marking more. This question's worth 5 marks, this is worth 4. You can get it to do that maths for you. And that can allow for greater conversations, again, when it comes to that benchmarking and moderation process. So for example, in this snapshot from Excel, right at the very bottom of the screen, down here, you can see that the 3 markers looked at the same piece of work. So that's the same paper ID number. And we can see that whilst J and L gave it the same for communication and referencing, marker A gave it completely different scores. They were lower across the board, but you can see in particular the real big difference in terms of those final marks is actually coming from the communication and referencing part. So that means that when you're having those really often awkward benchmarking conversations at the beginning, it can be far more data informed and far more specific. Oh, why did you say that was a fail for referencing? Because I saw this and this and I thought it was better. Let's make sure that we're in line with each other. And you can keep track of that and make sure and feel more confident that the marking is all in line with each other, even if it's by different markers. This is the data analytics point, is very much the reason why I love this project, because those examples that I've just demonstrated are illustrative of some of the things that you could do, but because you've got access to the data, you can do anything you think of when it comes to this assessment process for generating feedback. At the beginning, I spoke about the fact that I wanted to make the most of the feedback we've generated. And I spoke about the frustration that there is that students don't engage, or not all students engage and read their feedback. I want us to flip it and change what we mean by the end user of feedback. We view the student as the end user. I think we should also be viewed as an end user, but we can only be viewed as an end user if we have data to base it on. So for example, even if you hate Excel, if you use this approach, you get access to the baseline data analytics that Microsoft Form provides for you. So you now have data super simply on how many students, if there's a choice between 2 different tasks, how many students did essay number 1 versus how many did essay number 2. That's data that you would not have if you only have one submission area, unless you literally went through and did a tally chart to count how many were on essay 1 and how many were essay 2. Equally, you can go through and you can find out, okay, so what were the most common areas that needed to be fixed? What was the common feedback comment that I gave? And quite often, in this case, I think it was case name dropping, which is the wording that I use when students drop in a piece of authority without explaining how the authority is relevant, like a mic drop. So they go, oh yeah, I fixed it all with this piece of authority, but don't explain why. So I might have an impressionistic view that that's a problem for my cohort, but in my experience, once I finish marking, assessment's dead to me. I can't remember any of it anymore. Even if I feel like I'm going to remember it, it's gone. So this gives me proper data informed that I can go to the students with, that I can say, guys, the biggest issue that was across the board was this, let's work on it. Or if you want to go for more subject specific, so I've looked at the average marks, and this many students cited people, you won't necessarily understand the reference, but I recognise an LLB was mentioned earlier. So Donahue and Stevenson, which is a case about a snail, and the birth of the tort of negligence. So we might say that, 25% of you cited Donahue and Stevenson, which I told you not to talk about because it's not the correct case, it's not the right test to use, and this was the impact that you had on your mark. I can calculate that with certainty, as opposed to the impressionistic view of lots of you did it and I think it brought your mark down. And this in turn can then be used for intervention. So for an example, that case name dropping example, it was cited 28 times when we completed the marking of a piece of work in early November. We did planned intervention where we talked about what case name dropping was, techniques on how to improve it within another module that was being assessed in a similar way. And the next time that piece of work was marked, this was last academic year, the number of instances where we gave the feedback of case name dropping dropped from 28 to 9. And then this, I think, is the exciting part of that data and what it can do to tackle the modularization of assessment that we currently experience. There are lots of benefits and positive discussion around programmatic assessment, moving away from the modular structure, but it's very unlikely that a university is going to do that given the fact that that's how it's set up and how all the quality assurance processes work. So as academics, we need to try and find alternative ways across a programme to help the students in establishing and creating those links. So one of those ways to tackle this comment by Fry about the modular nature of courses is to use this data across a program. So this is an example of an Excel document that pulled all the data through automatically, matching it against student number, which could be used by personal tutors to identify common areas of feedback and feed forward that the student needed to work on. So, for example, I can't really see because the screen's a bit small on my side, but towards the bottom, you can see, I think the penultimate row, you can see that there's quite a few of that orange declaratory application where the student declares something but doesn't explain it. As a personal tutor, I can see that, and even if I have no knowledge of the assessment, I can have techniques and feedback and feed forwards and exercises to help the student to tackle that. It allows us to take assessment and the feedback outside of that modular context. And one of the things that I'm currently working on is through the use of Power Apps, creating a personalized dashboard for students that they can log into with their student number, which then will allow them to see quite clearly on one screen, mapped against university assessment criteria, how they're in colours where they sit from a grade perspective for each of the different common assessment criteria. So subject knowledge, analysis, research, for example, so that they can see and track, is there one area that I'm weaker in? Am I all over the place? I did really well on analysis in this one task. Why? What can I do in the next one? So it's a way to try and tackle and ensure that programmatic light way for the students to view their feedback and assessment. So that is very much a whistle-stop tour of this approach and the benefits of the approach and the different ways that the data can be used. I have got a toolkit that I'm happy to share if people want to have a go themselves. And equally, if anyone has any questions that they want to ask, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah. So there was just one question here to put the links to the resources in the chat. Yeah. We will also, Elizabeth, put together a post about this talk with the recording and all resources on our Tile network website for people to look at. So thank you so much, Rebekah. If you want to share your toolkit now, that is fine. And then we can probably unshare and have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, I'm just getting, so I had planned on putting the links in the chat and then realized as I started presenting, I didn't have them to hand. So, but I'll put the, get it now and put the link to the toolbox in as well. Toolkit in now.
Perfect, thank you so much. Yeah, to the audience, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat or on camera. It's up to you, absolutely up to you. I think Rebekah will then take one question at a time.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to ask? Maxine.
Oh, thanks, Rebekah. That was a really interesting talk, really informative. It's an amazing system that you have there. I guess my question was around I like the way that you used exemplars with the students sort of marking the exemplars, if I followed that correctly.
Yeah.
Using the assessment rubric, they then put in their statements into the form. They get emailed with that information, but there's also a sort of a template with what the teacher marked them on in terms of the same rubric. My question is, what do they do after that? Do you ask them then to identify areas where they could perhaps look and ask more about the criteria? Yeah, it was just wondering what the next step was really after that.
Yeah, so there is an element in the email that gets sent automatically that asks them about to reflect. They can then share their thoughts in a discussion board online on Blackboard, which is the VLE that we use. But predominantly, I use it in class. So I have access to an Excel document where I can see, oh, 90% of the cohort clicked on this button, that was wrong. Let's talk about it, let's tackle it, let's explain it. And then after we did a session where we talked about it and we went through the exemplar with that in mind, to where I was specifically tackling. So you might have thought this was good, but actually, no, it's not. And here's why. And then we repeated the exercise and we did find that students weren't 100%, but I think there's always an element of that tacit knowledge that we're never going to get away from. But students did tend to do much better the second time they had a go at the activity, suggesting that they did understand a little bit more how that criteria actually applied and could hopefully therefore apply it to their own work.
Thank you. I've got another question, but if there's anyone else, I'll wait.
I think you can go ahead, Maxine. You can unshare your screen, Rebekah, if you like, because I think you can see it. That's fine.
And yeah, just that towards the end there, your slides on how you categorize the feedback on the Excel spreadsheet and across the program. Have you done any analysis at all in terms of whether that feedback is kind of more task related, related to a particular thing that they have to do in one assessment, or more process related, so something that's maybe about the writing process, analysis process, that they can carry forward to future assessments?
Yeah, so the initial analysis that we've done has been based predominantly in our first year, which tends to assess in very similar ways. So, and which tends to be more skills focused, which means that we were able to pick up skills across. As you start to go into second year, and in particular the final year where things get a little bit more diverse, it can be a bit more challenging. But part of the goal of the approach, in my small way of trying to take over the world, is that to try and get academics to see the value of that and therefore to use similar vocabulary when it comes to a lot of the skills. So if I can say this is one of the things that we can put together, guys, but only if we as a program come together and identify common issues and what those issues look like and how we're going to explain them to students and have that almost set assessment vocabulary in order to allow us to do the proper data analytics, the goal is that hopefully that will encourage that. I'm starting to persuade in the, coming against the academic freedom point, but I'm doing my best. And hopefully that will improve it for the students as well, because if we're all singing off the same hymn sheet and having the same vocabulary to explain issues, the more likely it is that the students will therefore understand and draw those program links.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, Maxine. Any other questions from the audience? Anything that pops up to mind? Jinu?
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. So I just saw the Excel table just showing on the last two slides. And how do you think teachers could manage and make the best use of the schedules and making students to follow up step by step, just like a form like milestone?
So I think that the benefit of the data is that it would be data that was normally lost. And I think we've all had conversations with personal tutees where they've come in and gone, oh, I got this piece of feedback on an assessment that you know nothing about, and they're trying to ask you, you as the academic, to help them to improve going forwards, and you're trying to understand what the feedback is as well. So the dashboard the goal is that will help those conversations work a bit better. But also it means that there are more resources that we can create for the student. So you can make it far more targeted and make personal tutoring, which is commonly, I think, across institutions being changed to more personal academic tutoring and coaching. You can make that more meaningful by saying, okay, this is a bit of feedback that you have. Well, here are some resources that we have collectively put together on how to improve that. So go and work on that and let me comment on that. So it's taking the skills almost out of the niche subject areas. So I realise that's more what academics could do, but from a student perspective, I think there is a recognition that so much of the marking process is tacit and hidden and in the academic's head. So I think there is more that we can do to try and explain that, to make it more approachable for students to better understand it, so that then they can make the most of the feedback. So I think there's a little bit more for us to do before we can start asking students to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just another question, if so the students perspective, what are students' responsibility, and what can they do to achieve from some of that better as a collaboration way to foster the mutual learning environment?
So in terms of what the students can do, I think it's about engaging with it and engaging with the feedback that they are receiving, and also engaging with us as we are writing this feedback. So as I say, the benefit is that a lot of these feedback comments and the feedback comment writing stage, whilst it can happen throughout, you can constantly update the Microsoft form to deal with the nuances of the, in my case, undergraduate student who comes up with something weird and wonderful every single time. But by preloading a lot of the comments, you can work with the students on actually designing those comments. So one of the activities that we've done in one of my final year modules is I asked them to help me draft the rubric, to try and again help them to understand the rubric a bit more. And as part of that, I was like, okay, so I'm going to use this form approach. I explained it to them, and I asked them to help me come up with the feedback comments. So again, the more that they're involved in that part of the process, hopefully the more that they understand, and then the more they can apply it across the board to their other assessments too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? I have actually one question. You showed that spreadsheet that was color coded for moderation purposes, and I think that is quite interesting. But you said you manually did that. So is there anything that could be automated in regard to that, to do that, given that sometimes we have like very large cohorts across different markers and so on?
Yeah, so a lot of it depends on, so that was kind of, I think oftentimes my advice would be have an idea of what sort of data analytics you want to do, and then almost design elements of your comments to help you to do that. So when I did the color coding, it was I wonder if I could do this. Having done all the marking, I was like, wonder if that would work. Now, when I do that, the automating part with the you can get the Excel to change the color based on color formatting, and I color format it based on keywords like very good, good, that kind of thing. Or you just have your statements and link them to a particular word in terms of whether it's a positive comment or a negative comment. So again, it's a bit of building in initially, but doesn't have to take an insane amount of time in order for you to get to do that sort of wider analysis. I would also caveat all of this with the fact that I'm good at tech, but I am by no means an expert at all. So my knowledge of Excel is basically from ICT when I was doing GCSEs and playing around with it. So I'm undoubtedly sure that there will be other ways that you could take this and automate so much more. But mine tends to be more just need specific and need driven.
Thank you. Any other questions? That is fine. If that's not the case, then I would like to thank you for your talk. We're going to share the slides and the recording on our Tile Network website as well. And thanks for the audience as well for joining and for asking questions. And see you in the new year at a new event. Thank you and bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye now.